we will begin and we will introduce Tony, who's going to share a few thoughts with us. Come on up, Tony.
I hear the applause. That's from my family. And this is good? All right. My name is Tony Psychotis, and I'm proud to say that I am one of the original members of the St. Christina of Tyre Parish, so that means I'm older than 20 years old. I was told that I would tell you a little bit about the birth of the parish. Unfortunately, I was also told that I had 2 minutes to do it. And my family would tell you that at my age, I don't do anything in under 2 minutes any longer, but I'm going to give it a shot. Several years ago, more than 20 years ago, there was an Orthodox community here in Fremont. Unfortunately, there was some dissension, and a slight majority of the members of that community had come to the conclusion that the Orthodox Church didn't really belong here. It belonged somewhere else. And so they got permission to move to another location. Unfortunately, they took with them the parish priest and 100% of the parish funds. What was left was a small group of very dedicated, faithful servants of the church. They had no priest. They had no facility to hold religious services, and perhaps most of all, they had no money. The diocese decided to designate this small community as a mission, which gave us some of the money. They appointed a priest fresh out of the seminary, and we began holding religious services where we could find a place. Many of the parishioners offered their homes, and so we would hold vespers or liturgy in private residence, much like the early Christians did in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd century. When we could, we would rent a facility. The one that's most memorable to me is the liquor store, where there was a room above the liquor store, and that's where we held our religious services. But we were moving up. We eventually were able to have regular services in a social hall in the Niles district of Fremont. When we entered the facility on Sunday mornings, we could still smell the residue from what had been taking place the Saturday night before, but it worked. About that time, we knew something was missing, and what it was, we had no patron. We had no one to guide our parish, and so we began to look for some of a saint or someone of that nature who would lead our parish and inspire us. And as I remember, it came down to 2 individuals, and the one we selected was a young teenage girl. Her name was Christina. She lived in the 3rd century. She found the faith, she practiced the faith, and she died for the faith. She was a martyr. And from there, the parish moved on. Now, many of the people who were experiencing what I've just explained to you are here tonight. And I would like to introduce them, but I can't because my 2 minutes are up.
Well done, Tony.
Tony, I'm not going to be able to follow that at all. In fact, if people want to take a nap now while I speak for the next 2 minutes, hopefully only 2 minutes, that's fine, I don't mind. I'm Alex Prescott, so yes, I was one of the original members of the parish here. That group, and what I want to talk about really is kind of the providence, just the way that God has worked miracles with our community. It always started off, as Tony said, at one time that many of us, we were didn't have a place to worship. And the first place that we turned to gather to worship was Holy Cross Monastery in Castro Valley. Father Stephen was there at the time. Our choir sang services, and we're waiting to see if we might get approval to start a mission in the Diocese of the West. Well, we waited. What we learned is Father Matthew Tate, who is the Dean of the Diocese of the West, of the Mission Diocese of the West, the Deanery, yes. that he was a strong advocate for us. And if it wasn't for Father Matthew, we may never have started St. Christina Parish. I just can't say enough about him. I'm sorry that he's not here tonight with us. But through his advocacy, we gathered on the feast day of St. Athanasius. It was actually for Vespers in a home in Mount View. And one of the first things we had that happened to us that night, unexpectedly, there was a good friend of mine, Pastor James Kramer. He was from the Missouri Synod of the Lutheran Church, and he's donated a number of items that are within our parish of St. Christina. Then he showed up in the door, rang the doorbell, and said, "Oh, who's there at the doorbell?" So he came in, and right in the middle of our meeting, he brought in a chalice, a beautiful silver chalice that he had rescued from an antique show that was being held somewhere in the Bay Area. And he thought about us. He said, "We need to put this chalice back in an Orthodox church." And so that's just one of the first providential things that happened, within our parish. And in fact, it was used this morning for communion. So if you see that beautiful silver chalice, then you'll know where the story came behind that. So we did have an organizing committee. Father Matthew got us to organize ourselves. At that time, there was 30 different faith communities in the Fremont area that were working for a place of worship. And so, yes, we ended up above the liquor store. The Muslims had the second floor. We had the third floor above the liquor store. We used to call it the upper chamber. And we were only there for about 2 to 3 months. What happened is that it was a week-by-week thing, and we couldn't guarantee that we'd have a service every week. So it was through the support of another good friend, an excellent friend of our parish, Joe Faria, who belonged to a local Catholic church, but he loved us, he knew us, and he introduced us to John Weed, who owned property in the Fremont area, the Niles area, and he introduced us into Niles Hall. So thank God we had a place we could worship week in, week out. We had a long-term lease. Thankfully, again, another bit of providence had happened. Niles Hall, just weeks after we were able to find another location in the Mary Kay building, the pink Mary Kay building on Peralta, there was a murder at Niles Hall. It was very sad. It was a quinceañeria. It was a wonderful event. Had we still been worshiping there, we would have been shut down. We could not worship in a place where a murder had occurred. The place would have had to been, reconsecrated. In fact, it wasn't even our property. So just another bit of providence that, that the Holy Spirit guided us to a new location where we could be. So, I also want to shout out to Father Yuri, our very first priest at St. Christina. He was a newly minted priest from Russia. He immigrated from Russia. And I love him in the sense that he used to say things like people would ask him, "So what's the Russian Orthodox Church like? What is it like in Russia to be Orthodox?" And he said, "I have no idea. I didn't become Orthodox until I came to the United States." And Father Yuri, the Muslims, as I say, they kind of followed us. We were at Niles Hall on Saturdays. I remember one day that they had like a commemoration, Life of Jesus or something, on Holy Saturday it turned out to be. And Father Yuri would engage with them. We'd move in and we'd have our service on Sunday after the Muslims had finished. And Father Yuri would say, "Well, do you want to see what the end of that story of Jesus is? Just stay tonight for Pascha." But that's the kind of priest that we had, and it was very sad, when he was reassigned to Los Angeles. His Russian English skills were such that he was needed in the Cathedral in Los Angeles. We had no replacement priest. Father Matthew said all the seminaries had been reassigned, and we had nobody in the pipeline. And then thanks to Eric, who'll be speaking here shortly, he made a phone call, found out that Father Michael was available, looking for a parish, and again, another act of God's providence that we're able to have Father Michael come. Otherwise, we would have been, who knows, reader services for at least a year. So I want to thank also just a lot of people who had been here to help support the parish. We had the Founders Grant from the OCA, $40,000 a year for 3 years, was instrumental in keeping us going. We even donated, Tim and Jenny Newsma had donated a Lexus to the parish to try to sell that and just raise money for the parish. So as Tony said, we didn't have a lot of money coming in, but there were people willing to donate. Father Michael, your now church, St. John Damascus, donated altar vestments and analogs, icon stands. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here, especially those who are a member of our parish way back then. Jim and Gretchen I have a whole list of people here, but I think I have to. I have to sign off now. So anyway, thank you so much for your attention. You can wake up now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Eric Worth. I think most everybody here has been to the parish and seen our beautiful temple. And this is sort of the after picture, the now picture. But what I want to try to paint in your mind is a picture of what this building looked like when we first investigated it. So we were looking for a permanent place because we were in the Mary Kay building that Alex was talking about. That's the reason why we have pink chairs, by the way, in the church. But the owners of that place kept on raising the rent for us every year, and it was getting to the point where it was becoming difficult to meet, that part of our expense. And so we started a search to find a permanent place. And we went through this very elaborate process, and we were not having much success. We looked at a lot of different places, and nothing seemed to fit, and there was kind of a lot of other communities that were looking for places. And then Father Michael had the fire inspector come in to the Mary Kay building on his normal routine, where he would go to make sure fire extinguishers were, in the proper places and all of that stuff. And so Father Michael asked him, so, we're looking for a place, and, you're kind of out there and around, and you might notice a place that becomes available. He says, funny you should say that, I know, just a place. And he says, I just condemned it. so he put us in contact with the owners of it, and sure enough, they were not very happy with the current tenants. They were effectively being evicted by the fire marshal. The fire marshal actually put chains on the doors so that they couldn't even get in. So we managed to go and meet the owner who lived right next door to the place. So that nice house that's towards Fremont Boulevard was actually the residence of the owner of the hall. And that hall was a historic building. It had a marker in the front of it that said something like it was erected in something like 1914 or something like that. Yeah. Sadly, during the renovation, we broke it, and so it didn't survive. But anyway, so when we first went into the building, we got the keys to unlock the chains, and we were able to go into this place, and it had been used by a Muslim group that had a quote-unquote reading center there. I think they were actually worshiping there, but just trying to get under the wire with all the permitting and everything, so that's how they advertised themselves. But we walked in there, and the place was in squalor. They had these really old rugs over everything in the whole area, which is now the nave. Including, there used to be a furnace on the back wall where the deacon bench is, that nice wooden bench that's along the back wall. There used to be a furnace there with a chimney on the outside. They had rugs on top of the furnace. So this is probably another clue of the fire marshal. And the place was a disaster. We went into the kitchen. They had this ancient cast iron stove that was really grungy. I mean, with like food underneath it and just nasty. And so we were looking in there, and the owner was like, well, you have to have an imagination. but we did see it, because the building had a great space. I mean, and it was very deceptive, because when you drive by the place, you have no idea what it would be so voluminous on the inside. And so we saw that. The place where the sanctuary is right now was a stage. This building was originally a community hall for the women in the Centerville district, and it was actually used by the suffragettes, to drum up the vote for women for the women to be allowed to vote in this country, and they had rallies there and such. So there is historical significance to this particular building, and it's over 100 years old now. But when we moved in, well, we went through a long process to actually get to the point where we moved in. First, we had to find parking for it because there was insufficient parking for there. We had to go to the city, get a use permit, and they said, well, we have to have enough parking. So we had to actually buy the building on the corner in order to be able to use that hall. And so we actually went through all this process, assuming that we were able to get the hall and buy the building on the corner. and go through that process. That used to be a dental lab, by the way, the one that we're using for the church office. And so we actually acquired that first, and then were able to, we were planning originally to lease the hall building, but then we ended up saying, well, we should buy it. If we're going to buy the building on the corner, we better buy this one, So we ended up getting the seller to finance most of that for us, because that was after the meltdown with the savings and loan and everything, and banks were just not lending money to anybody. So we had to do crazy things in order to get enough funds in order to buy that place, and especially the one on the corner, because that was the first building that we had to buy. And we ended up having lenders from other parishes, other Orthodox institutions, members of the faithful, all lent significant sums personally in order for us to be able to do that. And we had this humongous spreadsheet that ended up having over 40-something odd loans that we had over the history of the place. And we needed, they were all short-term loans, interest only, and so we'd end up paying off one by getting another one and accumulating our principal over the time. So it worked nicely. Anyways, they're giving me the hook. So, but I wanted to try to paint this picture of what it looked like before, and now you see what it is after. Anyways, thank you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Mary Proskop. I'm the daughter of the other guy who was just up here. So, you're another guy. How did that Eric just described turn into the beautiful temple that we all know and love today? The answer is a lot of hard work. We must have had dozens of work parties. There's a stretch where every single weekend, everyone in the parish was down there at the church in overalls with sponges and buckets and whatever we needed to make the property what it is today. And I can still picture Barbara Wilson in a hazmat suit crawling in the crawl space. And at the same time, Eric was crawling through the attic. There's a lot of crawling going on. And it was just and we had people who were actual professionals, like Russ, came in and did a lot of our electrical work, John Matsanis. We had people like myself who had no idea what we were doing, but we just showed up and tried to help. One of the problems that we had on the property was just a ton of weeds. There were weeds everywhere. There was trash all over the backyard. The fence was falling over. And so there was at least a day where I remember Maha, Father Michael, your kids, and just everyone was just carrying armfuls of weeds and trash to the dumpsters by the curb. One of the cool things while we were weeding was we actually uncovered that foundation brick that said 1914 on it. And so that was really fun because we all kind of like took a little break, went over to look at it, and kind of think about the legacy that we were a part of now. And speaking of bricks, a lot of you know where I'm going with this. So the brick porch that we have in front of the building right now, we actually tore it apart brick by brick. We stacked up all the old messy bricks. We cleaned them off one by one, and we stacked them up again. And we ended up actually selling those, getting rid of them, and buying new bricks to rebuild the porch that we have today. So I don't know how many days we spent working on that, but that will live in our memories forever. That was also the first and only time that I got to use a jackhammer, although I basically touched it for like a second. I think I had to fight Tony for it, and Valentine.
No, Mike Luciano.
And Mike Luciano. So we had a lot of fun with power tools throughout the process. Probably the coolest and craziest part of the whole renovation was that after we did all of this work in not one but two buildings and the entire ground, so basically that entire like half block area, it turned out that we had to move the electrical pole 4 feet. So imagine, we're just trying to find a place to have church every Sunday, and the city tells us that we need to move the electrical pole. So we did not do that ourselves, but one of the coolest things was seeing the cherry pickers come in, having the city do that, rebuild the entire sidewalk, and I think that's one of the moments when it really sunk in for me that this was our home, this was a real building that we were creating, and literally the sweat and smiles, not tears, the sweat and smiles of everyone in the community went into the church that we have today. So thank you everyone who participated. Next up is Ron Gazelli.
Good evening. I'm Ron. I'm not an original member of the parish. My wife and I were in a Greek church at the time, and neither of us speak Greek. And we started looking for an English church that had all English services. We heard about it, but we didn't know where to go. So we're at the Greek festival one day, and up comes this priest munching on some baklava, Father Michael. And we got to talking. He said, "Oh, that's my church." So he said, "Come on out." So we had the directions, and we pull up. It's a house. And we go, "What, this is the church?" It had a little sign out front. So we go in the front porch into the house. And what used to be, I guess, the living room and dining room of the house was now the nave. And people standing all together. There's a pole in the middle of the nave. And off to the right, there was a father's office eventually. Some of the older folks sitting down in there. And at the far end of the nave, there's a wall, but it had this big, huge opening there. And we're looking in there, and by golly, there's a priest back there. And we could see Father Michael back there, and the head of probably one of his sons, probably Peter, was altar server. And we go, "This is unusual." And pretty soon we hear the choir going. In the meantime, Mary Zellum, hi Mary, came up and greeted us and said, "Oh, hi, I'll let you know, Father, that you guys are here." So as we're looking for the choir, we look around the corner, and in the kitchen is the choir. And they're just beautiful choir. Have you ever heard it? They're still beautiful. They're just going at it. And I go, this really is unusual. But what got us from the very first time, Sen and I have talked about it over time, is that there was a certain energy in that room at that time. People wanted to be there. We didn't know the struggles they had gone through before this, but the fact that they had finally got somewhere, because they knew that they had to go to next door, and that we now have a new home. And it was unusual worship service. I mean, our Greek church had pews and we sat there, but this we're all together, kind of close together. Father said hi to us after Mary's own took care of that, and we go for coffee hour. It's on the front porch, and there's a coffee pot in the corner, and we all come down, and Barbara Wilson and Jerry Norman, bless his soul, has since passed away, grabbed us by the arm basically and said, "We're going to introduce us to everybody on the porch." And everybody was so happy to see us, and it was a phenomenal experience for Sandy and I. And looking back on it, I realized that was the moment we decided to join the church. And what impresses me most, even to this day, that feeling that whoever walks in the front door of St. Christina is going to be welcomed. We are a huggy church. Even those that we've known for years, they still get a hug when they come in. And I think some of the newer members here will attest to that we have kept the legacy of the early founders of this church, that we want a church for everybody, and everybody's welcome. And for me, that was a fantastic experience.
So, Father Michael Anderson, you fell for it. The priest is going to talk. I mean, the stories that you're just hearing are just the tip of the iceberg of the grace that God has shown forth on this community, wanting an Orthodox Church in this place. What I'd like to kind of mention is, well, actually two things. Sorry. Two things. I guess I got a minute each, so let's move along. The first is, in the Gospels talk about, Christ telling his disciples to go and to feed the thousands, right? And so they're like, all we got is a few bread, some bread and a little bit of fish, and like, what are we gonna do? It's like, it'll be enough. Go, 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 go. And I can't tell you how many times, and I hope you get a little bit of it from the stories that we heard, how many times of our meager offerings that we had, we would just offer to the Lord along with our blood, sweat, and tears and our time, but God would bless it. And the fact that what was going to be absolutely impossible becomes possible. For us to be able to find a location, for us to even be a mission as Tony said, for us to be able to do this incredibly complex, overly, the city of Fremont made sure that we put trees in certain places, and it had to be a certain tree, right? In this one certain place. Like the specificity of it all. Moving that utility pole, right? All of that, it's just insane. And yet, we just took step by step by step, asking for the Lord's blessing, and the Lord blessed it. And it's just amazing to see when you do that, right? St. Christina is a witness of what can happen, what God can accomplish through his servants, if they just step forward in faith with what little they have. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is, I always found it kind of remarkable that a church that was so small and was struggling so much and had all these Herculean tasks that were being set before it, there was always a desire, there was always kind of an inner need in the community to make sure that we went beyond just our own life together. And it wasn't just about inviting people into it. There was always this need and this desire to go outside of our life to make sure that we let people know. And so, I think back of all the creative kind of things. I remember Mary Zellum, who arranged for us to be at a farmer's market. And so we had a little booth, and by the way, it wasn't even in Fremont, it was down in San Jose, but we were there and we had music that was playing and we had a little booth set up and we introduced people to the Orthodox Church who had never heard about it before. We had lectures on iconography at the public library. We had, oh goodness, the list it goes on and on. We went to, most recently, right before COVID, we went to the Wine and Arts Festival here in Fremont and set up a booth, but we also set up a prayer area where people could go and light a candle and they could just see what an Orthodox prayer corner might look like. And what was always amazing, and by the way, to this day, they still have the open house, where it's an open house, but it's also a yard sale, which is a double gift because all the faithful get to empty out their stuff, we'll say stuff, their stuff from their houses to bring, but then people can come and see the church kind of in a neutral zone where they're not necessarily coming to a, quote, an open house. It's kind of like, oh, I'll come and look around and see what you have here, but maybe I'll take a peek in the church. And what I want to say is it's kind of in line with the loaves and the fishes. Those events, it's not like at any one of those events we ended up having a bunch of people from those events that ended up coming to the church. But I can tell you, to each and every one, every time we did something like that, God blessed us with new people that did come to the church. So again, it was this sense of going forward, stepping forth, doing the right thing, and then being open so that God can do what needs to be done. And so I am incredibly grateful for the 15 years that I was pastor here at St. Christina Orthodox Church. I cannot tell you, I now have all kinds of experience in things like building projects and all that kind of fun stuff. But the people and their faith is such a profound witness to me and to my family, and it has changed me. And what makes me really, really happy is to see the new faces here at St. Christina, is that you see the same spirit of outreach, that same spirit of love, of providing the embassy of the kingdom of God here in Fremont for people who want God, who perhaps are broken, who perhaps are hurting, but they can receive the love of Christ in its members as they walk through that door. So I give thanks to God, I think, and we all give thanks to God for St. Christina of Tyre Orthodox Church, and we pray that we will ever remain faithful to what God has done in it.
Thank you, one and all, for your beautiful words. And thank you, Father, for the mini homily at the end. Yes. It saves me, and I will spare you all to try to say something else, because there's nothing I could say that he didn't already say better than I could say myself. So what a testament to God's grace and faithfulness. Looking back is so important for us to remember the good things that he's done, but also as we continue to press forward into the future so that we can see the legacy that's behind us, we can see the shoulders on which we're standing, and trying with our own little efforts to continue the beautiful mission of this parish.